Welcome back to Mean Streets, the podcast where we investigate the best, worst, and forgotten movies of film noir and more. I am Luke Deckard.
And I'm Matthew Booth.
And we are your cinematic sleuths. Now it's time to crack another case. And we're back. Hello, Matt.
Hello, Luke. How's things?
Things are good. Things are good.
All good.
I'm recovering from inhaling too much dust and feeling all the better for it. So, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. I've not been inhaling dust, so I've kept well. But you know, that's what you get for doing DIY in your own house, Luke.
Foolish mistake. Foolish mistake. So, well, Matt, let's not keep the people waiting any longer.
Yeah.
Let's tee up this investigation. What do we got today?
Well, today we've got 1995's The Usual Suspects, starring Kevin Spacey, Gabriel, Byrne, and Chazz Palminteri. Written, of course, by Christopher McQuarrie and directed by Bryan Singer. And the IMDb logline is: the sole survivor of a pier shootout tells the story of how a notorious criminal influenced the events that began with 5 criminals meeting in a seemingly random police lineup. 1995's The Usual Suspects.
And with that, Mean Streets is canceled. Kevin Spacey, Bryan Singer. Here we go, guys.
Here we go.
Now, for this episode, we thought, hey, we need to bring on another cinematic sleuth. And so we reached out to Sky from the Epic Film 89 podcast, and we're really happy to have you with us. So welcome, Sky. Thanks for joining us for this.
Welcome, Sky.
This episode.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Matt. I've become a fast fan of your podcast. I absolutely love it. I've binged so many of the episodes in a relatively short time. I've only recently, discovered you guys, and yeah, I'm very privileged to be invited on.
Well, it's our privilege as well. We love your podcast, so it's great.
Yeah.
It's great to connect. It's great to connect. So yeah, I'm, when we reached out, it was like I asked you, I said, what, we want you to come on. What are you interested in? And you're like, the one film you haven't done yet but that you've covered. But you're like, The Usual Suspects. I was like, I've been wanting to do that for a while, but it's just one of those ones that just sort of hangs around the peripheral, but never actually gets picked. So I was glad that you picked it. Because I do love a good 90s thriller. And it's hard to say that this one, look, this one doesn't disappoint.
No.
The creative team behind it might have some things that disappoint you, but the film itself doesn't disappoint. But we won't go into those things too much, but we can make plenty of jokes along the way. But let's talk about initial impressions of The Usual Suspects, that for some reason, some annoying reason, I keep wanting to call it The Unusual Suspects. And it just irritates the shit out of me that I do this. It's no one else's fault but my own. But so if I slip up throughout the episode, it's just a weird thing that's going on inside my brain. But Sky, we'll start with you. What was your first impression of seeing the Usual Suspects?
Sure. Well, just to give a bit of context, I think I'm slightly younger than Matt. And a little bit older than you, Luke. So 1995, I've asked this question of myself several times on the podcast recently because we covered last year for the 30th anniversary 3 really big films from 95, the first of which was The Usual Suspects. We thought we'll tear the band off first and discuss the most problematic one. And then we did Heat, which was an episode that we've been waiting to do since the podcast began. And then we finished off the year with an episode on Seven, David Fincher's film. And
that was a good episode.
For whatever reason, bearing in mind, I was probably in 95, I think I was 19. Mm-hmm. I cannot think what I was doing in that year. I was probably far too wrapped up in girls and football and other stuff, and I clearly wasn't going to the cinema because 95 has become probably one of my favorite years in all of cinema. There's so many amazing films that were released that year, and every time I make a list of my favorite films from that year, when we're considering what episodes to do on the podcast, I've seen barely any of them in the cinema, so I don't know what I was doing. So there's every chance that the first time I saw Usual Suspects probably would have been early 96 on VHS. But around about that time, I was heavily into crime thrillers, gangster films. There was a short list of films which I was binge watching every couple of weeks on rotation. Films like Goodfellas, Casino, Raging Bull, so a load of Scorsese films, Mean Streets, and then films like Pulp Fiction, The Usual Suspects, Heat, pretty much on rotation. All I can recall is the first time I ever saw The Usual Suspect, I was just completely blown away by the film. the big twist obviously being, one big selling point, but just the fact that it is such... I think it was probably about the fourth or fifth viewing where I actually could get my head around the plot, because every time I put the VHS tape back in, I would have to go over in my head, well, what exactly is the plot again? Because the plot is so complex. Unlike some of those films I mentioned, like Heat, like Casino, like Seven, which are, they are fairly straightforward. Even though The Usual Suspects has not got like that fractured narrative like Pulp Fiction, the plot itself is so kind of, I don't want to say convoluted because that kind of sounds negative, but it's so complex that my brain can't retain what the plot is every time. And now I've seen it about maybe 20 times or so. It's there ingrained in my psyche. But yeah, I was blown away. I thought the performances were superb, the editing, just everything about the film. Bearing in mind, I was only like 19 then, so I was I wouldn't have called myself a cinephile, but I was certainly someone who had been sort of well into film for at least maybe 5 or 6 years. But yeah, it was a film that I loved from day one, and I've loved every day since. The one caveat being that for a period, the film did kind of become difficult to talk about without sort of wondering, am I going to kind of be seen as controversial by highlighting my love of this film? But as I've got older and tried to separate the art from the artist, and it was something we had to cover when we covered the film last year. And there's no easy way of discussing the issues with one of the main stars and the director, but I don't think that should take away from the fact the film being a collaborative effort. And The Usual Suspects was a film made by hundreds of people, and a film with a superb script by Christopher McQuarrie. I don't think we should sort of cancel the film or lock it away in a vault just because of the wrongdoings of two of the people involved.
Yeah, no, I actually fully agree with that, because it is. Like I said, it's like I said, there will be jokes made along the way, I think, but I think it is really important to emphasize that yes, it's it's one of those funny things where like there are times when like we can use James Gunn as an example, but in a way that's not going to be about him being a pervert, because he's not, I guess. I don't know, but like everyone talks about James Gunn's DC universe. It's like, well, it's not. He's not even the full guy in charge. He's just one of two guys. And then, like, it's not James Gunn's Supergirl. It's someone else's film, and he's just the guy running the thing. So it's funny how some films just get labeled as, oh, well, this is this person's film, whether it's the star or the director. And then when that one of those two do something bad, then like the whole thing has to come down. And it's like, well, not everyone was a dickhead involved in this thing. There's people who put in a lot of hard work into this thing. And I agree. I don't cancel. I wouldn't by any stretch say cancel or lock away. I also, I'm a writer. I'm very much against any kind of suppression of art, and doing away with art just because of certain things like that. Because there's more than one person involved in this kind of stuff, and it's important to have. Now I am fine with like, look, am I going to go watch a new Kevin Spacey film or show? Probably not. Am I going to go see a new Bryan Singer film if he ever gets one again? Probably not. Am I going to rewatch X-Men 1 and 2? Shit, yes. I'm
definitely. Yeah. I mean, regular listeners know that Chinatown's one of my favorite films of all time, and
yes, same.
Talking about problematic directors, that you've got one there, but doesn't alter the fact that Chinatown is an absolutely superb piece of work. And another huge favorite of mine is Hitchcock, and he's a troublesome man as well, in many different ways. So I agree with both of you. I think, locking away the Usual Suspects because of one of its stars and its director being what they are, I think it's not the right way to go, put it that way.
Yeah.
I'm not a big censorship fan generally, and I think this is, it's not censorship, but it's in the similar vein to that I just think it's pointless to say you can't watch The Usual Suspects because two of them involved in it are problematic. It's all you're doing is missing out if that's the way you feel by not watching this film. So
yeah. So that's all that stuff out of the way.
That's all that stuff out of the way.
Matt, what was your initial impression of The Usual Suspects?
Well, 1995, I was 21 and at university and enjoying myself immensely. So I don't remember seeing this at the cinema. I don't think I did. I think I was enjoying myself too much to go to the cinema at this particular time. But the first time I remember vividly, that really sticks in my mind watching it is, like Sky said, on VHS. So it'll probably be the next year. And I watched it with my brother. We watched it in my mum and dad's house in the living room with the curtains shut, broad daylight, with the curtains shut. Put the film on. We watched it. The end credits rolled, and I remember vividly looking at each other, rewinding it, and watching it all over again because we couldn't quite believe what had happened. And then, at the end of that second watch, saying, "What?" Still saying, "Do you get it?" And talking about it for the rest of the day. It was one of those films. And again, I must have watched this film 20 or 30 times since. I think it's a great piece of work. But it was one of those where the ending wasn't spoiled. There was a period of people saying things like, "Oh, you'll like this film. There's a great twist at the end." So that spoiled The Sixth Sense for me because I could see that twist coming a mile off because somebody had already alerted me to the fact there was a twist. That somehow didn't happen with The Usual Suspects. So when this twist happened, I was gobsmacked.
There you go. Well, I know I think I've seen it in the past at some point. But I don't remember when. Like I've seen, it was one of those things where it was almost like watching it for the first time when I watched it the other day, because I was talking about it with my wife. She's like, "We watched it." I was like, "I don't think we did, but maybe we did." So I have this weird blank. I had this weird blank spot in my memory about when I watched it the first time. And so it was really fun to just go back to it because this is not one that I've watched you guys have watched it multiple times. I definitely have not, which is why I was keen to go back and revisit it for this. So going back to it with almost no memory of it was fantastic because it was almost like a fresh go. But there were things I was picking up and I sort of, and this is why I'm like, some things have retained because I knew that Kevin Spacey was the bad guy. I was like, oh yeah, he's the guy who shoots the guy at the end. So it's like somewhere in the past, it had stuck in there somewhere. But that being said, you got, Matt, you said you instantly rewound it and rewatched it. No matter knowing the ending or not, this thing is so good.
Yeah.
The acting is so good. Sky, as you said, the editing. I made lots of notes about the editing along the way. This is just, it's an hour and 46 minutes. Every scene is just perfectly finely tuned. You're at first you're a little bit sort of jarred by the non-linear aspect of the film, but I think you find your feet pretty quickly with it, and in a way that I would say maybe like a Christopher Nolan film is tries to do this. I think this sort of succeeds where maybe certain Nolan films don't necessarily succeed on their non-linear confusing approach. So this one is really quite, I would say, quite masterfully done. As you're being pulled along with this mystery and you're watching Verbal get be interviewed in different points in time, while at the same time the Chicken Man is waiting for this sketch to get done, and you're just like, who's the face going to be? Who's the face going to be? Who's the face going to be?
Yeah.
It's just the way I just love the way it builds its tension, and it doesn't do it without. There's no gimmick, right? There's no sort of like false sense of okay, well, this is a really cheap gag that we can kind of jump scare them with, or this is just excellent. And I was just having a whale of a time rewatching it.
Yeah, one of the reasons that my brother and I watched it again straight after we'd watched it for the first time was because he was convinced that it had been a cheat ending. And he said, I want to make sure that ending has been properly clued, for want of a better word. And we watched it, and I remember the second time he was going, oh yeah, look, that's where he realizes this bit of the story, and that's where he makes that bit of the story. And so you're right, this is such a well-crafted screenplay that there is no cheat. I don't think in this. I think it is all properly set out for you to work it out, which is always a joy when that happens.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. All right, well, let's go behind the camera and talk about how this thing got made. So it costs $6 million, and its box office return was a sweet $67 million. So it made its money back. As we said, was directed by Bryan Singer. I mean, what's your guys' take on Bryan Singer as a director? Nothing else. As a director, I mean, I sort of probably first became aware of him in the early 2000s as a preteen, watching X-Men, X2, and then branching out from there. But he's I think as a director, he has a lot of decent stuff under his belt until you get to things like Superman Returns and Bohemian Rhapsody. But what's your guys' take? Sky, we'll start with you. What's your take on Bryan Singer?
I think he's a director that peaked early. I certainly think, without doubt, for me, The Usual Suspects is his best film. I think he kind of yo-yoed quite a bit. So you've got 95. He did this. When was Act Pupil? That was
98.
Oh,
98.
Yeah, 98.
Which is again, still a really solid film. Look, I'm a huge, lover of comic book films, and 2000s X-Men. A lot of people could argue that kick-started the resurgence in comic book films. I would argue maybe The Blade did it 2 years before that. But to me, the original X-Men, whilst that's a film that could be credited for just being, adapting X-Men into a film and doing it as successfully as that, he deserves all the credit for it. But to me, the film has got some issues, and in terms of direction, there are little moments in that film, like that line of dialogue between Storm and Toad, the one about, it's one of the worst lines of dialogue I've ever heard in a film. At what point did he look at the script and think, oh yeah, that's a really good line, we'll put that in the film, and then continue through and allow that to be in there? Because when I think of poor lines of dialogue, I always think back to that. But then, what was it? 3 years later, X-Men 2 was just that, that film was just absolutely phenomenal.
Exactly.
And, and I also think that he hit this, he regained a similar stride there with X-Men Days of Future Past, which was, several years later. But like you, Luke, I'm not a fan of Superman Returns. I like it more than the most recent Superman film. But again, I think, and Kevin Spacey was so good in that film. He really irritated me in Superman Returns. And I just, I thought that it was a very overblown performance. I'll always be, loyal to Richard Donner's original films with Christopher Reeve and Gene Hackman. But he kind of is very much up and down. And didn't he do X-Men Apocalypse?
Yeah, I wasn't going to mention it.
Now, being a lifelong X-Men fan, and Apocalypse being like one of my all-time favorite comic book villains, when that film was announced, I was like, well, look, this has to be, just everything I've ever wanted in the comic book film. And he just, it was not a good film at all. So he's directed one of my favorite comic book films in X-Men 2, and I guess you could add Days of Future Past to that as well. And one of my all-time favorite films, not to give you away my verdict too early, but The Usual Suspects is there, certainly in maybe my top 20, top 30 favorite films of all time. But then in between that, he has kind of made some duds, and then obviously, due to other things that happened, his career has kind of stagnated somewhat.
Yes, yeah. I think it's also worth noting he is also responsible for House, the series House, and I love House. I think it's a brilliant show. I like the idea of it's Sherlock Holmes but in a hospital, and instead of solving crimes, he's solving medical mysteries. So yeah, but I think yo-yoing is one of the best ways to describe it, because you have something like the Usual Suspects, fantastic. I agree, X-Men 1 is not the strongest. It's good, but it's not the strongest. But X-Men 2, Days of Future Past, The Usual Suspects, then things like House, it's like you can see the creative I guess genius that he kind of possesses, but then he just goes off and does weird ass shit that just doesn't land whatsoever. And it's interesting because I remember listening to another podcast a while back, just about X-Men First Class, and they were talking to the writers of that film and who had some insight into X-Men 3, and obviously that other director of X-Men 3, Brett Ratner, another shithead, took a lot of flack for that film being so bad. However, the writers were saying, well, actually that is literally the film that Bryan Singer was prepping to direct when he left to go do Superman. So there's not that much difference between what was being laid down with. So it's like, in the way that, X-Men 1 is good, X-Men 2 is phenomenal, X-Men 3 sucks. Futures, First Class was good. Days of Future Past that he comes back to was really good, but then he sucks again with Apocalypse. So it's like you can't rely on him to be consistent in the way other directors in the past can. But the one thing he is consistent on is he does consistently work with John Ottman as both composer and editor. And I think sometimes that might be one of the strongest components to his creativity is I think Ottman is a very good composer, and I think he does really well in the editing chair, making these things that might not work so well. At least, I don't like Superman Returns, but it's not when it's doing something fun, like you can feel it in the editing. I think that the plane sequence, stuff like that, I'm like, this is like a Star Wars situation where it's like, this isn't George Lucas. This is the editing base, so making this more, pulling me in more than Singer. But I don't know. What do you think, Matt? What's your take?
Yeah, well, I've very little to add to that. I think yo-yo is the right phrase. When you look at Singer's filmography, those are the only credits that stand out to me. So I am a fan of the first X-Men film. Not as good as X2, obviously, but I think it's a solid start to what became a franchise. And I think Sky's right. I think Blade sort of set the wheels in motion, but it was X-Men that got those wheels up to speed, for what came later. I'm not a big fan of Superman Returns. Long time since I've watched it, but I remember being pretty underwhelmed, apart from that plane sequence. So it's like, he seems to be one of those directors for me that when he's good, he can be really good, but when he's mediocre, he's really badly mediocre, Yeah. And I think he's at his best in this film, in The Usual Suspects. And I agree about the editing. I think certainly in The Usual Suspects, the editing is easily one of the reasons that this film succeeds so well.
Yes.
Especially in the late on in the film, the sequence where can't remember his name, the detective who's interviewing him. What's he called?
Dave Coulion.
Coulion, yeah. When he's making the case that Keaton is Kaiser Soze, the way that reconstruction of events he's edited, is brilliant. Really good, and I think that's purely down to Ottman. It's a really good, convincing false solution, to the whole thing that's going on.
Yeah, it is. It is. And of course, at this point in time, Chris McQuarrie is he's also in Singer's kind of camp, and they kind of collaborate a little bit, which is very interesting. You don't really ever think about these two guys in the same kind of in the same camp, but in the mid 90s, there they were. And it's I don't know. To me, it's just interesting to look back and think, okay, this is the guy who did Jack Reacher, directed Jack Reacher, did 2 of the best Mission Impossible films, and then 2 of the worst. Is that fair to say? I hate Dead Reckoning and I hate Final Reckoning, but I think Rogue Nation and Fallout are amazing. But I think but I can see, you can kind of see the Unusual Suspects, and when you know that Chris McQuarrie is behind it, and then I was thinking, okay, well, next year you have the first Mission Impossible film, and this film sort of has a vibe that is a bit like that first Mission Impossible film, in that you are, it's this kind of big oh my god reveal as to who is the mastermind behind everything. So there seems to be like a bit of a similarity there. And then when he goes on to be actually doing Mission Impossible, I can kind of see where you can go from the Unusual Suspects to writing and directing Mission Impossible movies in the next kind of 15 to 20 years. But yeah, no. So I think McQuarrie was. I think his script it also needs to be sort of highlighted, because Ottman's editing is fantastic, but I think the script itself also needs to be, that needs to be highlighted, because I think without those 2 things, because he did win. He won the Academy Award for best screenplay, best writing for original screenplay, and I think, damn, that is deserved. That is deserved. Which apparently
it's definitely deserved.
Apparently he worked at a detective agency or something like that, and part of his idea for the whole board, the kind of pin board where Verbal gets all of his story ideas, as he was from sitting in front of one and seeing that, which I found it so fun. I found it so fun, so fascinating.
Yeah, this is something I wanted to ask you guys, because Steve Amos, one of the co-founders of Film 89, he's a published author as well. He's written several books of fiction, and as you guys have. The only thing I've ever written is maybe 50 or 60 pieces on film for the website, of varying lengths, which are all pretty much film criticism. I cannot and will not ever be able to write fiction. It's just something I can't do. But I'd like to think that I know what a good story is, and what completely baffles me and what I just cannot get my head around is how efficient the story is for the Usual Suspects, how razor sharp the script is. I don't think there's a wasted line of dialogue. 1 hour 46 minutes. It never ceases to amaze me how compact this story is, and the film finishes, and I'm almost gasping for breath, thinking, I either want to rewatch it or I want more. And given the fact that you guys are authors, this is surely just lightning in a bottle. It's got to be you don't get scripts like this just coming through Hollywood. If we had one a year, that would be amazing.
Yeah. So as we're talking, I'm in the process of plotting my next book, and I'm having a real struggle with it. And I watched this thinking, I wish I could plot like this. I wish I could make something as magical as this. As seemingly easy. As McQuarrie seems to make it. 'Cause I'm sure it wasn't easy.
And didn't it just come from? I think he saw an article in a magazine, and the title of the article was "The Usual Suspects." I don't even think he ever made the connection to the line from Casablanca. And from that, then he had an idea of 5 guys in a lineup, and I think the original tagline was "You can all go to hell."
That's right.
The later tagline was 5 guys, 1 lineup, no coincidence. That all came later. But
the image he had was what became the poster. Pretty much.
And I think if going back to another film that you guys have covered and we have as well, is The Terminator, and that was born from James Cameron fever dream in Rome when he had I think he had the bout of the flu, and he had this dream about this sort of skeleton robot with a kitchen knife dragging itself across the floor because it had been cut in half, and he kind of woke out of this dream and he kind of jotted notes, and that's how The Terminator was born. So he says, but the fact that such a complex story came from this little pearl of an idea, but I guess maybe that's how every story is born.
Yeah. Well, whether it's the thing is, they always they say writing is rewriting, and that is really true. You don't ever, any writer who says they just sat down and they did it and this was it, like, I don't believe that.
I don't believe that either.
People say, oh, so and so they had this whole thing planned from the very beginning. I'm like, shut up. No, they didn't. It came with time. Because if this is true, I'm not sure, but I read that he wrote like 9 or 10 drafts for this before they were happy with it. The impressive thing was that he did it over like a 6-month period or something like that. I'm like, geez, if I wish I could write that fast. But yeah, so I think that's the trick with this stuff is that, and this is why I get so baffled when certain films go into production before there's a fucking like script done. Like, what are you doing? I think Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3. You think of James Bond. What was that shitty one? Quantum of Solace. Like, why? What do you? Why? Like, this is ridiculous. This is why when people talk about these current Marvel movies and they're like, oh, I've only read like a couple of pages. I'm like, how are you all not reading a script and understanding the full context of a story? Like, this is insane. This is insane to me. Whereas this was McQuarrie and Singer, really nailing something down that they wanted to do based on this. I like you said, I love it. This tiny little nugget, this idea of a poster, this idea of I was sitting in this room and that this was the corkboard or the whiteboard, and that's we're gonna go with that. Like, and just how this thing unfolds from that, but also taking inspiration from other sources out there. There's hints of other films and stuff going on. It's been, I think even Bryan Singer sort of talked about it in the guise of like similar to Double Indemnity and a little bit of Citizen Kane-esque of being kind of non-linear and things like that. So it's just sort of it's quite fun to just pool all these influences into something, and then when it works and it comes across as original and not derivative, that is the lightning in the bottle situation, And I think
it definitely is
incredible success with this on the writing side.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a watertight script. It's a watertight script, and I agree with what Sky said about the fact it's only an hour and 46 minutes. I crave films these days that have got a runtime of an hour and 45 minutes. Instead of like 3 hours or whatever it is that we seem unable to tell a story in less time. And it does so much within that time. It does so much within that time, and it's so cleanly done.
I'm so glad you've said that, because we say often on the podcast about the fact that we lament the death of the 90-minute film. And just this week now in half term, I finally caved to my second youngest child, who's been nagging me to take him to see Avatar 3.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I know. 3 hours, 17 minutes. And it's not a film. It's not a film that I find torturous or unpleasant, or there was a level of engagement. But with that last hour, I was genuinely thinking, "Oh, please, someone set off a fire alarm or something, because this is never going to end." Does that story need to be over 3 hours long?
No, none of them do. Over Christmas, my wife and I were torturing ourselves by watching bad movies, and we tried to watch Avatar 2, and we got all the way through until there was about 40 minutes left, and that's where we left it. And we've we're now in February. This episode's gonna come out in several months from now. So yeah, I guarantee that we will have not have finished it We will have not have finished it because it's just not gonna happen.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to talk about Avatar. We'll talk about Avatar on Cinema Sleuths, wherever you get your podcast. Because boy, do I got opinions on that one. But yeah, no. So these guys apparently had trouble getting this off the ground though, without there being sort of a big star attached to the project. Singer and McQuarrie just weren't getting the finance that they wanted. But what they did sort of had in the background was Kevin Spacey. So apparently Spacey met Singer during the release of Public Access, his first major film, and Spacey was like, I want to be in whatever project you guys do next, which then happened to be this. But they got like money from like a European company, and they were like, yeah, we'll give you some money. But then that sort of fell through. But then by that point, they had people on board that then got people interested, to properly finance the movie, which then goes to show that one of the main reasons, if my understanding is right, is that they just weren't sold that these two guys could be like that they could actually pull it off. And it does make you wonder, man, how many times today, if it does this happen? I mean, especially now when we're in the era of everything has to be IP. Like, how many awesome artists and could be, the next whatever, Spielberg, whatever the hell, aren't getting their shot because Netflix isn't going to take a risk on something original because they need to produce, I don't know, whatever the fuck they want to produce. But yeah, so it's interesting. These guys were kind of also going, this has kind of always been a little bit of a problem, but I have to applaud them, and I'm glad that they were able to kind of push through and get this thing made, because it's hard to get good stuff made, and just generally.
Yeah, I think that, the more time goes on and the more, I look at modern cinema and what it is, I really do look back at the 90s as a decade and just think, I don't think we realized how good we had it. The 90s kind of, it saw the stuff that we were getting so much of in the 80s, like, big budget, action blockbusters and stuff like that. They never went away in the 90s. They just sort of evolved into the likes of Terminator 2, Independence Day, which itself revived the disaster film from the 70s. But what we also had in the 90s, which we don't get now, is medium budget films, and independent cinema thrived in a way that it hadn't previously before. And there would have been pressure on studios in 1995 to find the next Reservoir Dogs, to find the next True Romance, Pulp Fiction, whatever it may be. So I think there was far more of a chance of something like this getting made then than it would now, because if it was going to be $6 million adjusted for inflation is in 2026, I don't know, but this film now would not get into the cinemas. It would end up on a streaming platform, which makes it all the more miraculous that if you just go back to maybe 2019 and look at the Safdie Brothers Uncut Gems, a film that was of a similar sort of budget and level of storytelling, didn't involve flash special effects or anything like that, yet that film got a cinema release. And I think that 2019 I think is maybe one of the last great years of cinema before we went into this, like you say, Luke, everything has to be IP. It has to be all homogenized, and what can we make here and throw $200 million at and turn it into a franchise? Or by the way, it has to be at least 2.25 hours. I just think the 90s gave us, and it did give us a lot of crap. It really did. But I think that the further we move away from that decade, the more I look back on it. And it could just be that, it was a decade that I grew up in, I matured, as someone who was getting into film and then ended up, being obsessed with film by the end of that decade. It could be a lot of nostalgia, but then I genuinely look at films like this, like, the rafter films that we've mentioned from 1995, which are just, all-time classics. And then, it went on as late as 1999, which was a phenomenal year for film.
Yeah.
And I just think it was like I said, we just didn't know how good we had it. You know, on all fronts. You know, it was something for everyone.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's hard to like. I can see people like, oh, you separate the nostalgia from it, but no, I do think there's something to it because we've over the last like several years, a lot of the times when we're rewatching stuff from either 2000s, 90s, 80s, 70s, and of course with Mean Streets, where I'm watching stuff from 40s, 50s, so on, and you just come across a level of quality, a level of authenticity behind certain things. You're just like, wow, we don't get that anymore. Like loads of times I mentioned the show Spencer for Hire, the Robert Urich series that ran in the 80s in the US, and it was a massive hit, canceled before it really needed to be, and there was a big outcry, and they ended up bringing it back for some TV movies that weren't very good, unfortunately. But we watched that, and like the way it sort of like tackles and handles like problems of the time is leaps and bounds more nuanced and interesting than the way certain things are handled now. And I think we were quite surprised, Matt, weren't we, when we watched oh shit, what was the Austin Butler film? Why has it gone out of my head?
Caught Stealing.
Yeah, that
absolutely.
We said, which is set in the 90s. I think written around that time. The novel it was.
The novel, yeah.
But that's I think we said in that interview or in that discussion that this was like one of the best movies the 90s never made.
We did, we did. Because
it would have been an absolute hit. Scott, I don't know if you've seen that, but I would like go check out Caught Stealing. Genuinely shocked that was even in cinemas because it is a 90s movie that somehow they managed to get to the big screen.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I don't want to be too jaded and cynical about how things are now. When we do get the occasional gem, pardon the pun, with films like Uncut Gems and Caught Stealing and a lot of others, but it's again,
rare. It's rare.
Yeah, but they're never the big sort of tentpole films these days. They're always the ones that kind of come in under the radar and unfortunately are not seen by anywhere near enough people. So just think 1995. You could have walked out of the cinema having seen The Usual Suspects, and you could have gone right back in and watched a film like Seven or Casino or even Las Vegas, Braveheart,
yes,
Toy Story. I mean, it had everything, but there was, these were the big films. These were the big films that we've been talked about at Oscar time, award season. But it wasn't a case of, I've never even heard of that, and people turning their nose up and saying, why is the Academy just honouring films that no one has seen? People had seen these films. At 19 years old, these were the films that my friends and I were talking about, kind of just with feverish excitement.
Yes,
we just don't get that anymore. And I think, as cinephiles being the age we are, I think we should be the gatekeepers now to sort of guide our children the right way. Like my son, who has just rudely interrupted this recording now. Fair play to him. He is going down the right path, and he is seeking out films himself. A lot of the time without my input. And I would like to say I kind of been at least partially responsible for putting him on the right path. But when it comes to his approach to films and what his idea at 14, nearly 15 years old is a good film, I think he's kind of on the right track, and he kind of is able already to sift through the stuff that's like your avatars and whatever, and then pick out the films which are more like the films that we grew up on, irrespective of the genre. But going back, one thing that I don't want to not say about the script of this film is that there isn't a wasted line of dialogue. And any line of dialogue that could potentially be seen as extraneous. And the best example I can give is that line by McManus when they sat in the car planning whether or not to go ahead with the job on the boat. And I think it's after Fence has been killed, so they're all obviously a bit driven by anger and a bit kind of like, we could be walking into a trap. And then they talk about the risks involved, and McManus says, there isn't anything that can't be done. And then at the end of the scene, there's a little pause, and then McManus says the line, "The news says it's raining back in New York." And when we covered the film on our podcast, we try to break down what that line means and what it means in the context of his character and that, part of the film. And ultimately, much like this film is really kind of loaded with ambiguity and is, I don't even think it's as cut and dry as the twist at the end. It could well be that, Spacey's character being a very unreliable narrator, it could all be bullshit. He could have just made that story up to get out of the police station. He could be a very creative person.
Yeah.
Given the fact that it seems to be made up from all of that stuff on the board. But that one extraneous line of dialogue from McManus is also one of my favorite lines in the film because of the fact that it suits the tone of the moment. But ultimately, it's like, what did he mean by that? And we didn't come to an answer. And I think that's no bad thing, because I do like it when things are purposely ambiguous. And I think, like McQuarrie and Singer have said, there is no definitive answer as to who Spacey's character is in the overarching story. He may not be Kaiser Soze. Kaiser Soze might be the character that we see pick him up at the end, played by Pete Postelthwaite.
Yeah,
it could have been potentially Gabriel Byrne's character, and the story that Kint is giving could just be a load of BS just to get him out of that police station. Because he has essentially talked his way out of a criminal conviction for being involved in this whole thing in the first place. And I think the genius behind the fact that all of these different story strands, you could pull them, and this, the whole plot won't fall apart because it could be down to individual interpretation. I just think I cannot think of a film that is as cleverly written as this, where any number of possibilities could be true.
This is where you can stand up and applaud the unreliable narrator in your living room 4 hours after standing ovation for 4 hours, because last year I was doing some judging for a competition and for crime fiction competition, and yeah, there's a big thing in the UK, kind of your supermarket fiction, to do unreliable narrator, which basically just means I'm just not going to tell you things. And then when you revealed, it's like, oh, well, it's because it's no, that's just being a shitty writer. And but what this does is, as you're saying, Sky, and this is why this is such a good movie. And it is that it's like, well, you get to the end of the movie and you think, oh shit, it's it's Keaton. Keaton is the Kaiser. And then it's like the guy's sitting there with a cup of coffee, got a little smirk on his face, David Kujan. He's like all happy and he's looking at the board, and then that smile begins to fade and he drops the cup and he's really and then what we don't know either is verbal, as Kevin Spacey's character Roger, is he actually, when his limp stops, is that real, or is that Kujan thinking about what's just happened, thinking, oh my god, no crap, it's not Keaton, that was the guy, that's the Kaiser, oh my god, holy shit, he must not even be crippled, and so he's now reimagining. So it's like and this is where it's like the unreliableness of everything feeds into this story, but it does it in a way that doesn't cheapen anything and just makes it all the more fascinating and unique and smart. This is like, this is the kind of stuff that I feel like Nolan tries to like achieve, but just like doesn't
oh yeah
doesn't quite get there.
I think Christopher Nolan likes to think, and this is no disrespect to the guy, I've loved a lot of the films he's made, but I do think he feels that he is the brightest guy in any room that he's in. And ultimately I don't think he is. And I don't think, he has made some phenomenal films, but I don't think I think his writing and his characterization kind of is where he falls down.
Yeah.
But this film, this is to draw a parallel to another film that we've covered recently on Film 89, American Psycho. And I think it was Mary Harron, the director of that film, and also Bret Easton Ellis both said that the ambiguity in that story as to whether or not Patrick Bateman is actually this murderous psychopath or it's all in his head as some sort of release from this horribly vacuous, corporate lifestyle that he lives with materialism being the ultimate benchmark as to whether or not you've succeeded in life. And this sort of murderous urges that he's getting could just be playing out in a fantastical way in his mind. They both said that, Bret Easton Ellis said, it's not my intention to give you answers. And then Mary Harron carried that then on into her film by saying, no, there is no firm answer. And I don't believe there is. And it's going to be down to your individual interpretation. And to me, that just gives the film so much lasting appeal. I still not solidified in my mind whether or not Patrick Bateman is a killer. Just like for maybe 25 years, I thought I had the plot of Usual Suspects sussed. And then, well, maybe as recently as back last year when we did our own episode, I started to think outside of the box and think, well, yeah, it's completely probable that Verbal Kint isn't anything to do with, Kaiser Soze, the legend of him, and is just using this story as a way to talk himself out of the police station. Whatever the truth is from his point of view as to his involvement in this, yeah, he could be the mastermind behind it, or he could be someone working for the mastermind, or he could just be a guy who is, and what does they say about him at the beginning? He's a con man. That is his forte. He's a manipulator. He's a liar, and the ultimate lie and manipulation could be the story that he has spun to Dave Coulion to get him out of trouble.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just even his nickname, Verbal. It's there.
Yeah.
It's there. He's going to just spin a web around you guys. Like, that is his thing. Oh.
He's definitely playing for time.
Yeah.
And he's he obviously is making it up as or embellishing the truth, perhaps is a better way of putting it, so that you don't know what is right and what is wrong. But I agree. I think the more I watch this film, the more I start, like you, Sky, the more I start to think, is he? Is it him? Because he's been arrested before. Verbal Kint has been arrested before. He says so. They've got charge sheets for him.
Yeah, he's done time with Dean Keaton.
He's done time with Dean Keaton. So is Kaiser Soze letting himself get caught all the time?
Is Kaiser Soze just a fairy tale that the crooks tell their kids, like they say in the film, just
as they say,
you rat on your dad, and Kaiser Soze will get you, and that could just be what he is, and it could just be the fact that Kint has packaged this story in order to fool Dave Coulion.
Well, that's right, yeah, because watching it this time round, I couldn't get out of my head the idea. Once this idea had come into my head, I couldn't shake it. And that is, Kaiser Soze, if he's real, has got this whole criminal empire working for him. And he himself goes and bees like a petty con man in America. Why does he do that when he doesn't need to?
And this is the bit that, and when I start to think, come up with these alternative versions as to what the story might be, I then start to question myself, and I'm like, okay, then, but what about Dean Keaton? But then they never found Dean Keaton's body.
Yeah.
And then I start to think, well, if Dean Keaton is Kaiser Soze, we saw how ruthless Kaiser Soze was when he shot his own wife and children. And then what happened? What are we told at the end? That Edie Finneran was killed. She was shot twice in the head. His own girlfriend, fiance, whatever she was. Who killed her? If it was Kaiser Soze and Kaiser Soze is Verbal Kint, then yeah, that fits in with what we're told. But if Dean Keaton, and I also love the fact that for 4 years, Dean Keaton was a cop. And he then turned into this guy who was having people who tried to testify against him killed. So clearly, he has got a ruthless streak like few other people, that we've seen in cinema. This guy is capable of anything. And did he get himself into the police just as a sort of, well, if I'm going to be the ultimate criminal mastermind, then I need to know how the police work on the inside. And if it's almost like that sort of Emperor Palpatine like plotting of how you're going to rise to power. You play the long game, and that is the ultimate long game. So the Keaton story kind of, it does work. And the fact that they never find his body, I think there's less evidence, but I think there is a case for the Pete Postelthwaite character could be Kaiser Soze, and Verbal Kint is what it is, kind of like his right-hand man. And then there's obviously the version of Verbal Kint being Kaiser Soze, which also works, or none of it, and it could just be a cover story by him to get him out of the police station. I mean, it all works to varying degrees. It's just, blows my mind.
And if he is the right-hand man, if Verbal is the right-hand man, then all the stuff in the police station is subterfuge, isn't it? To put get Cujon's mind thinking in a certain way, i.e., it's Keaton, so that he's not looking for the real Kaiser Soze. It was Pete Postelthwaite who's going to pick up Verbal in 20 minutes time, whatever it might be, and Verbal's just got to keep the story going to waste that time.
But then, as I sort of explained, my alternative versions when we were doing the episode, and then Neil said, "Yeah, but what about the sketch?" Because Argosh Kovacs, the Hungarian guy in the hospital with the burns, who is the last living witness to the existence of Kaiser Soze, when he was asked to describe him, what did the image look like? It looked like Verbal Kint. So, I mean, yeah.
But is that just the last guy that he saw?
Yeah.
Well, because the only person who really knows what he looks like is the bloke who gets shot in the cabin, isn't it? The bloke who gets killed in the cabin.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because he was
the bloke in the hospital bed doesn't know for certain it's him, does he?
Yeah, the guy in the cabin he was obviously the center of all the plot. It was it was nothing to do with $91 million of coke that wasn't there. It was
it's to get him.
To get him, yeah. Very, very elaborate. When surely he could have just got a really good hitman to take him out, but then we wouldn't have had a story, would we?
No,
true.
I mean, this is one of the things that this is unreliable narration. This is a film that isn't giving you all the answers and letting you make up your own mind. It's ambiguous, but this is how it's done properly. And all too often, you get these TV shows that, or even films that just don't explain something. And when you say, well, what was all that about? You're told, oh, you've got to make your own mind up about that. But you've not been given enough information. It's just lazy writing because they've not actually set the ground rules for you to form any conclusion. Whereas this is the opposite. This is absolutely giving you everything you need to come to a conclusion that may or may not be right. And the film just says, well, go for your life and try and work it out. And I think that's really rewarding because it means multiple viewings are just as rewarding as the first time you watch it. That's what I think the magic of this film is in this script.
Yeah. And obviously, we haven't even talked about the quality of the cast, but there's also that tone of the film and the fact that, when you guys, invited me on, you said, what film would you like to cover? I immediately looked through your back catalogue and, you covered the obvious choices for me, your Chinatowns, your Blade Runners, those sort of things. And then I thought, well, The Usual Suspects is a film noir. I mean, the way the film opens with that bizarre title card, Bryan Singer's film, The Usual Suspects. It's not like John Carpenter's The Thing. It's Bryan Singer's film, The Usual Suspect. It's just slightly differently worded. And then, I think the score is very noir. You've got, Giancarlo Esposito's character of Jack Bay. I mean, he's walking around with a hat and a trench coat, and he's kind of smoking these cigars down to their butt. And he is a very much, a typical noir detective. And the complex plot. I think the only thing it hasn't got a femme fatale, but not every noir needs a femme fatale. But this is very much rooted in crime thriller territory. There's throwbacks, like the way we meet the five guys who will end up in the lineup is similar to how we meet the team in Kiss Me Deadly from 1955, and any other number of I think noir thrillers and detective stories where you could pick out these little bits and little homages, to various films, whilst this always does feel very much like its own thing.
Yeah. I mean, I was sort of thinking a little bit about the killing. I mean, there's a lot of film noir that are just that are playing just here's a group of gangsters just doing gangster shit, and that's really what this is. Plus, also when you think about it, Gabriel Byrne's character Keaton, he's a former cop. You've got your dirty cops, you've got your corruption, you've got your murder, you've got your mayhem, you might not have the femme fatale per se, but like I said, not every film noir necessarily needs to fulfill all of the tropes.
No.
Or neo noir needs to fulfill all of those tropes to be to be successful.
Yeah, and you've got the New York's finest taxi service. I mean, that's a film noir subplot there straight away. Cops taking crooks offense goods. I mean, it's just the corruption is definitely all over this film.
But I also think there's kind of like there's like a timeless quality to the film. There's nothing in the film that immediately grounds in any particular time. Obviously, but we're fairly confident this is taking place in the mid-90s. But even after the opening credits, the title card is San Pedro, California, last night. It isn't telling us exactly when this is taking place. Then you've got these characters turning up like Jack Bayer, who kind of he looks like he was taken from the 40s. It just I mean, that's another aspect of the film that has always stood out as being, very unique to this film. And then, the cast. I mean, where do you start with that cast?
Well, we start with Benicio del Toro as a sort of as I was watching, I was like, why is he acting like Michael Jackson? I don't know why. But I was getting Michael Jackson vibes from him. I don't know if it was the way he had his eyebrows done or something, but there was something he reminded me of late 80s, early 90s Michael Jackson for some reason. I don't know why. But
I think he's great in this.
He's fantastic in this.
Well, he knew, didn't he? He knew that his character was the most thinly written of the five, and he knew that he was going to get killed off halfway through the film. So I think he then purposely gave his character so many of these memorable quirks that he really did stand out in a short, the shorter period of time that he was on screen.
Yeah. Because was it not his idea to make himself almost unintelligible?
Yeah.
For that very reason, that he knew that he was really just sort of a patsy almost. And that he was going to get killed off, so it doesn't really matter what he says.
And I think he said by his own admission that his character was a mix of several different ethnicities and backgrounds, none of which sort of fit together comfortably. But I just think great bit of actor interaction and sort of guiding the story in terms of the fact that I really need to make my character stand out.
Yeah, and he's brilliant in the lineup.
Oh, the lineup! I mean, the making of documentaries, which are, I think they were on the original 2-disc DVD from back in the early 2000s. But there's a fantastic piece about the lineup where Bryan Singer was getting really sort of frustrated with the actors because they were just goofing around, and he said, "Look, guys, let's just go break for lunch." And they all broke for lunch, and they could see the singer. They were like, "Oh, we can see he's getting a bit peed off now." And then they came back. And if anything, they were worse.
Yes.
Benicio del Toro could fart on cue. And there's outtakes with him farting. And then Singer and McQuarrie are sat there and they've got their head in their hands and they're thinking, where's this going? And then it was in the editing process that they actually
realized. And there we go.
Yeah, the absolute gold that they had. And the fact that the camaraderie between these actors and the moments of humor that were breaking out, it's like, well, no, let's keep them in.
Yes.
And I think that is what works. And the lineup scene is just an all-timer. And little things something I'd never really noticed before. When it's got the long shot of the room that they're in, and you've got the police in the foreground, the actual frame, the window, is shaped as of the film's aspect ratio 2.35 to 1, which are those lineup windows shaped like that, or would they be taller just to allow for as much visibility of the people as possible, or is it just a cool little thing that Singer decided to do?
I bet that's just a cool thing they decided to do.
Yeah,
but that's cool though. But it is
cool. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. No, that lineup scene, I love that. I think because I wanted to talk about that one as well because when you hear the behind the scenes of that scene and how frustrated they were getting, and also Bryan Singer's true colors were coming out at that point. We know quite famously that he's a bit of an asshole on set. But when you look at how Ottman was able to take these scenes and edit this together, like when they are goofing around, it doesn't feel inauthentic. It feels like they're still in character. Like there are moments in, say, like the U.S. office where they kept a moment that wasn't scripted, but also didn't quite feel like the character. There's a famous scene where in an episode where at the beginning of the episode Jim dresses up like Dwight and acts exactly like Dwight, and then at the end of the episode the sting is that Dwight comes in dressed just as Jim, and they have a little bit of a back and forth, and Jim says something and then Dwight responds and goes, a little comment or something, trying to imitate something that like Jim would say. But the thing is, Jim would never say that. And that was just Rainn Wilson breaking character. But they kept it in the episode. And though it's funny, I'm always like, that didn't quite feel authentic. Whereas this, even though these are moments where they are like laughing and being goofballs and not really sticking to the scene, it just felt so, the piss take just felt so real.
Yeah.
And like we've all fucking been here before, so they're all joking around, they're all making fun of the line. Like it just felt so, yeah, authentic is the word I'm going for with this, because that's hard to do. But so it's both shows the way that they were meshing as a cast, though there was trouble within amongst the cast, but also just the power of editing to be able to take this chaos and make it as if this is how it was, you were told to do it on the page, and not make the audience second guess it, is just like I said, lightning. This film is a lightning in the bottle.
Yeah, because they do remain in character. There's a little moment where, when Benicio del Toro's doing, he's trying to read off the card, and Stephen Baldwin, like, he's poking him,
yeah,
and he slaps his hand away. Really, you think, well, these two are mates, that is how they would be together, needing each other and then slapping each other away. That and they keep all that in. It's just it's a tiny moment, but it says so much. And and I just love the in English, please.
yes.
And he's clearly Fenster's clearly sort of like almost offended by it, because he gives the line and then he goes, "What the," what I mean? It's a great little bit. I just love that scene. I think it's brilliant.
I just love the fact that each delivery is different, and then by the time you get to Kint and he puts the emphasis on me, give me the keys.
Yeah,
it's just something about that. I just it's just gold. It's all gold.
Yes. No, it's there's so much to enjoy about this. Like even the scene with Redfoot, with Peter Green's character.
The flicking of the cigarette.
Yeah, flicking of the cigarette meant to be in the chest. Hits him in the face, but they just keep going. They just keep going.
Yeah.
And it all just it's just pros. I mean, there's not a bad or weak performance. There's no weak link in and amongst this entire cast from start to finish. Like everything is just so. Everyone's just they're just
Yeah,
they're amazing.
There's little moments where, and I'm never going to say that Stephen Baldwin is the most successful actor coming out of this film, given his career after this. But there's little moments, even like he's got like the aforementioned line about ringing in New York, and the sort of ambiguous delivery of that and what it meant is one of my favorite moments in the film. And then there's that bit where he's holding the silenced handgun towards Kobayashi's head, and just before he says, "Just to let you know that it's going to be me that kills you," he licks his lips before he does it. And there's something about that little motion, that little thing that he does that just adds an extra layer to his delivery of that line. And then you've got, I think Chazz Palminteri, he gives one of the best performances in the film. And as when we covered the film, Neil pointed out the fact that, or was it maybe, I think it was Bill Scurry actually said that when the penny drops at the end and he's looking at the pinboard and you can see his eyes going from one thing to the other, and he's smiling because he's just recalling the conversation he's just had with Jeff Rabin about his messy garage. And I think any other actor and any other director would have let that scene play out a lot faster, and you would have been able to see in his expression the moment the penny dropped. But you don't. Yeah. You just see this gradual degradation in his mood, and the fact that, and I think the way that scene is edited as well, because we're hearing voiceover moments from previous parts of the film, which coincide with what Huyan is looking at. And I think that scene is just a masterclass in acting, editing, and it's the culmination of this just incredible story.
Yeah. He doesn't overdo it, does he?
No, not at all.
There's no sort of light bulb
Yeah.
moment, like you say. There's no sort of fictional detective, eureka, I've got it. It's a genuine human realization.
And it's
so close.
You mentioned Redfoot there, Peter Green's character, when they meet him, and the fact that I question why Keaton stepped forward to tell him about you were friends with so and so, some guy. Yeah, I did time with him. I just wanted you to know it was me that killed him. And it's like, why is he telling Redfoot this? There's no reason for him to tell him it. And it's almost like Dean Keaton, given the fact that he is this fallen cop, whether he fell because he got caught or whether it was all just an intentional part of building a criminal empire. I think he's trying to kind of build up an air of fear in people and sort of intimidation. And his character is very buttoned down throughout the film, apart from a few moments, like when he's on the boat and am I allowed to swear, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, when they're searching the boat and him and McManus meet up, and his delivery of the line, "There's no fucking coke."
Yes.
He's just yeah. Again, that points towards the fact that he isn't the mastermind behind this, and he is the one that's being taken along for the ride. But it's just the little moments where the anger does come through. It's Gabriel Byrne plays most of the film restrained and cool and kind of that sort of simmering malice, and then these little moments where his character does erupt. It just works, and the characters are really pushing, like Fenster and McManus. That fits in with their characters. But yeah, I just think across the board, I don't think there's a bad performance in the film. And the one that kind of plays it really straight is the stand-up comedian Kevin Pollak.
Yeah.
He does deliver some of the funniest lines, but he does it with just kind of this cynicism all the time, and he is just I think the way he plays it when they're in the cells, and ultimately we find out that he is the one responsible for stealing the truck full of gun parts. The reason they're all there.
He's just like,
yeah, he's like, yeah, it was me. I mean, like Pete Postelthwaite's character of Kobayashi, like the way when he's saying to the is it the 4 or 5 remaining guys? I can't remember if Fence has been killed at that point, but when he says what will happen to them if they don't go through with this job that they're doing for Mr. Soze. And the way he says what will happen to Edie, she'll be the victim of the most gruesome violation before she's killed, and it's just the way he delivers that, and he is just on the level calm and menacing, and his character, he's we know he's a British actor, but he's kind of could argue that he's playing brown face because he also speaks.
He's got a weird accent going.
Speaks with a kind of almost Indian accent, and he's got a Japanese surname. Again, that to me points towards the fact that he's, and as we later find out, that the name was taken from the bottom of a mug. His character could be completely made up. Apart from the fact that we see him at the end, but he doesn't speak. So that accent could have been part of Verbalkin's story. But again, Pete Postlethwaite's performance throughout is just superb.
Yes. Yeah. But also, given what he says to all the people, and then Edie does end up getting shot and killed, you're like, well, so then is it not Keaton? And does that mean he really is Kaiser? Or is it back to Verbal is Kaiser? And then they're both in it together. Because if there is no coke on the boat, where is the coke? Because there's that scene where after Todd Hockney, Kevin Pollak's character, dies, and Kevin Spacey's character, Verbal, is trying to get in the van that has all that money and has stuff in it, and he wants to get away, but then is thwarted from being able to do so in that moment, which then made me think, what is your plan here, Verbal? What are you doing right now? Where, what's going on? But we will never have an answer to that, and that's part of the fun this puzzle. You know, is you never really gonna know, but it made me think, huh? And then when then when Kobayashi turned up at the end, it made me think, oh, maybe these two have been in on it together the whole time. But then you just don't know. You just don't know, and I love it. And I love it.
And again, another little anecdote that was on the the sort of behind the scenes stuff on the Blu-ray and DVD or whatever, is when it points to the quality of Singer's direction, is when Stephen Baldwin first met with Singer. He'd read the script, he was signed on, and they were having their first sort of sit down and discussion about the character. And Stephen Baldwin said, "Look, I want, I've thought about the background of my character. I want him to be from this, from here. I want him to talk like this. These are the sort of, jobs he's been doing. Obviously he runs with Fenster. He's this, that, whatever." And he was kind of laying out the background of the character and telling Singer how he intended to play him. And Singer then was like, "Okay, yeah, that's great. Are you finished now?" Yeah, I heard all of that, but let me just tell you what I want you to do. I want you to do whatever I tell you to do and play the character exactly how I tell you to play him. And as Stephen Baldwin is regaling the person interviewing him about this, he says, "That was exactly what I wanted. I'd been on several films before this where the directors didn't really know where they were going. So anticipating that was the case here, I went into that meeting with that frame of mind. He immediately put me in my place in a way that I welcomed." And yeah, I just thought that was a really cool sort of insight into the quality of direction at hand here, coming straight from one of the actors involved in it.
Yeah, and I think you can see that in other Singer films. I think when he really knows what he wants, he really gets it. And I think you can use like X-Men 2 as an example of that, or Days of Future Past. Like when he knows what these characters need to be doing, you then get these icon. I mean, there's a reason why. I mean, you think about it's X-Men 1, but that's the first interaction between Xavier and Magneto. After that Senate hearing, that's an iconic moment in comic book movie, history. Like that, those two, I'm looking for hope. Well, I'll bring you hope. Just don't get in my way. Like, fuck. Like, he just fucking nails it with like he knows how to get there are these scenes that he just knows how to just nail, to get not just the actors to do what he wants, but to keep the framing interesting, to keep everything alive in a way that just sticks in your mind. Which is why I'm always very positive about for example, those original X-Men films, because I think they've lived in my brain far more than most of the MCU has. And this will live in my brain far longer than, I don't know, Inception ever will. Because there's just so much more going on just across the board. It is actually complex as opposed to superficially complex.
And the other thing about that is that very often, like films like Inception, they're very self-important to me. They're sort of eager to tell you how clever they are and wear that cleverness on their sleeve, whereas this does it with such panache and like throwaway. It's almost like a throwaway genius, because it knows how clever it is, so it doesn't need to broadcast it. It lets it speak for itself.
Absolutely, yeah. I wouldn't even say I think Inception is the biggest or the best example of where Nolan's fallen down in terms of that sort of approach to storytelling. I'd say that ultimately Tenet is probably the worst example because,
I've never seen Tenet. Yeah. I couldn't do it. So I can't, that's why I don't mention it.
And Interstellar is a film that is beloved by so many people. And, I will put my hand up and I will give credit to so much of what that film does incredibly well, but I will also have to point out some of the plot elements that just don't hold up to scrutiny. And I mean, even kind of the most basic scrutiny. And then there's, and this is a film that we covered on the podcast. We did a 2.5+ hour audio commentary on The Dark Knight. And as much as we spent most of the time singing our film's praises, we did have to point out a lot of the plot elements that simply didn't make any sense. And if I was there involved in that production, I would have to pull Christopher Nolan aside and say, "Chris, this part of the plot here, this bit with trying to remove a fingerprint from a bullet that's been fired from a gun into a brick wall. Have you got any idea how fingerprints work? How the fact that it's just the oil on your skin, and it wouldn't survive being shot down a rifle barrel of a gun that also gets superheated, and then it wouldn't happen, Christopher. It wouldn't happen in Star Trek. So, but again, I think he was a director who was allowed to get away with that sort of no. This is just a very cool idea, and you will accept it. Whereas this film, I've spent hours upon hours of conversations with friends, and on this podcast, on our own podcast, as we've done tonight, guys. And if our job tonight is to be sleuths and to work out the plot of this film and who Kaiser Soze is, then we have failed miserably. But I think that is part of the beauty of this film.
It is part of the beauty of this film.
Yes, I think that we put it under the closest scrutiny, and we have to put our hands up and say, Your Worship, we have, or Your Honor, we have no case. You got to check this one out and let them walk free, because it's so convoluted, but in a good way.
Yes.
But also like with a sense of humor as well. Which sometimes Nolan films have got no sense of humor for me.
No,
by and large.
Yeah,
this has a real. There are some laugh out loud funny moments in this, like you say, courtesy of Kevin Pollak mainly, but also Benicio del Toro. And they sort of play off against Keaton's real like suppressed anger and seriousness. It's just so well put together. It's just so well constructed, and it has a lot more impact because it's not that sort of self-indulgent, self-satisfying borefest that some of these Nolan films can be, that tread similar lines of unreliable narrators, and you're not really, what's real and what isn't. If you want to watch a film like this, I would pick this any day of the week over something like Tenet or Inception.
Well, it's not trying to be lofty. And it's not trying to, as you said, it's not trying to show you how smart it is. It's just you're coming in for a good time, and you get far more than you bargained for just across the board. And I think that's kind of the brilliance of it.
And again, guys, I don't want to sound like a stuck record, but 1 hour and 46 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
And it's just so dense. I mean, look at some of the other films that we've mentioned from the same year. Heat, which is just, epic. That's, 10 minutes short of 3 hours. You've got Casino, which I think is a minute longer. You've got, Seven, which is, well over 2 hours. And, they tell these rich, deep stories, very much character-based. But to bring a film this complex and this, repeatedly rewarding in under an hour and 50, I just think, it's just remarkable. It really is.
Yeah.
I think,
go on.
There's only a handful of films that, they plot kind of hits me in the same way. Obviously I've mentioned American Psycho, a film which, I've gone back and forth on where I stand on, what the actual truth is. It's a film I absolutely love, and I enjoy it the more, I watch it. Fight Club is a film that, it kind of blew my mind on first viewing, and I couldn't sort of get my head around what I'd just seen. And then the penny dropped on the second viewing, and, I've read the book twice, and I genuinely think that the film is an even, well, it's a better told story even than the book, and the book I think is extremely well written. It's brilliant. But the film is just a phenomenal adaptation of Chuck Palahniuk's book, which itself is just, again, hinges on a very unrelated or unreliable narrator, because you're dealing with a guy who's got very deep-seated undiagnosed mental health issues. But again, I think the story that we're being told there is only one version of the story. The fact that this guy is suffering from split personality disorder, and this is what's happened to him, and the final realization of what has happened at the end when he's in that building which is about to explode. But this again, this is there's so many threads of where this story can go But I just think it's just absolute genius. You've got the performances, as we said, the editing, the direction. John Ottman, who edited it and also did the score. He's pulling double duties, which again makes it all the more baffling that years later, when the pair of them did Bohemian Rhapsody, which is one of the worst edited films I've ever seen. the editing in that scene when I think they're outside a pub or something, they're sat around talking, and the way that scene is edited, it is just a masterclass in how not to edit a film, and that was edited by John Ottman and directed by Singer. So, yeah.
Well, there's speculation as to how much of that film was actually directed by Singer.
Yes, true.
So maybe we should wonder how much did Ottman actually edit that film.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you are quite right. Yeah. I'll retract my comments there, Your Honor.
We don't know we don't really know who made Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
That was, but, well, I think we should rate. I think we're at the point where we should rate The Usual Suspects. And I'm just proud of myself for not calling it The Unusual Suspects, which I thought I was going to be doing all night, which, yes, I didn't. But yeah, well, first off, as everyone knows, we rate all of our films out of 5 Falcons, 1 being the worst and 5 being the best. Sky, we'll start with you as the guest cinematic sleuth. Out of 5, how would you rate The Usual Suspects?
Well, given the fact that I've just spent the last however long we've been talking, maybe an hour and a half, singing this film's praises, picking apart the plot, not finding any flaws with it, 1995, as I've said, is one of my favorite years for film. When we were looking to cover films for the 30th anniversary last year on Film 89, there was a shortlist that was narrowed down to 3. We'd already done Casino a few years before, so we had to do Heat. I think, still to this day, as incredible as The Usual Suspects is, I would have to put Heat above it from that same year. Then you've got 7, which is, I think, 7. An all-timer. It really is.
Yeah.
But I think this film is right up there. And in terms of crime thrillers and, films from what is fast becoming one of my favorite decades, the 90s, this is one of the best examples. And I don't think it's a film that would get made today. I don't think it's a film that would get a theatrical release today, which again makes me all the more, sad about the state of cinema at the moment. But yeah, without doubt, it's a 5 Falcons from me. It's a flawless masterpiece, and I absolutely love it.
It's hard to disagree. I'll keep it short. I 5 Falcons for me as well. This film was pitch perfect. Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with either of you. It's a pitch perfect. It's a what did you call it, Sky? A masterpiece. I got to agree with that. And for a film that is constantly rewarding every time you watch it, you genuinely do find new things in it each time you watch it and new ideas coming out of it. So it's 5 Falcons from me, without a doubt.
There we are.
Great.
Sky, thank you so much for coming on. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad we could do this. I hope to have you on again on here and hopefully on Cinematic Sleuths as well. But tell people where they can find you if you want to be found.
You can find me on Twitter. I refuse to call it X, at Sky Movies. I'm also on Facebook at Sky Movies. I'm also on Blue Sky at Sky Movies. You can find the Film 89 crew at Film 89 UK on Twitter and I think it's Film 89 UK also on Blue Sky. I forget. I apologize. You can check out the website film89.co.uk. There's a raft of retrospectives and articles from a huge number of writers that we built up over the years. And please check out the podcast, the Film 89 podcast that's available, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Good stuff. Yes, you will not be disappointed. You guys have great conversations over there. I always enjoy listening. So yeah, make sure you find Film 89, find Sky. You're in for a good time. Well, I think we can wrap this puppy up then. We will be back with another investigation. So in the meantime, take care walking down those mean streets.